Hello, Mr. Lee. This is Mike Keek Cheatham. This is my first attempt at my presentation. This is for Philosophy 101. The date is July 6th, 2020. Initially, I just wanted to talk about the night of resignation and the night of faith, particularly because I definitely um, can reflect on that. There's been periods of time where I've had to put myself in incubation, and I have found faith from that and it's not because of how can I say it, I in this like detrimental position where I have to draw back and isolate myself. It's not like that. It's a willful action for merely just because of self discovery. But to move from that, my thesis now is rather than focusing on the attributes of these two nights, I believe there is a direct correlation of how we shape and pursue our own subjective truth by establishing our own state of reflection by means of isolation and withdrawnness and faith and hope. Um, and I think the comparison and the contrast I want to make first is the difference between objective truth and subjective truth. Objective truth is something that everybody understands. It's a construct within society that everybody has to adhere to. And in contrast, subjective truth is something that you experience yourself that you may try to convince or persuade or articulate through your words, and that is the most how can I say it? The best way of transmitting knowledge to another person is by your speech. Um, Objective truth plays no favorites, nonetheless. It is a universal truth that all adhere to. The ejection or rejection can leave room for risk. It's kind of like going against the grain almost, such as when crossing a street, you must look both ways, or that even as a child in the early years, you are committed into a certain training almost and that's your parents' job is to teach you these objective truths. Like don't go touch that dog, or don't touch the hot stove, or for this instance, don't run across the street without looking both ways. On the contrary, the subjective truth is really the subjective reality is based on your own experience to be considered your individual reality. That's the best understanding that I have of it. No one can bump into exactly or experience your reality. It is not a matter of opinion either. And that's where I feel like most people can get confused. But the explanation of the mental construct within your own consciousness. This construct exists only in your head. It's what motivates the social activist to protest, or for an individual to deny or speak on a subjective truth that another person might be entitled to, or that another person might believe. This is where I feel like most social discourse happens within our own subjective truths. Um, and this is why I think Kierkegaard, if I'm pronouncing that correctly as well, and his view of subjectivity is so valuable because it implores the development of the subjective reality, especially in the time that he was the most prevalent, where Christian idealism was seen as like the absolute truth, the only truth, at least within this region, I believe. Um, that he had to exert his findings or his teachings or his way of thinking within the God sphere, because it would be more conducive to um, the the time period that he was in. Um, Kierkegaard, in his book Fear and Trembling, examines the relationship between Abraham, who is regarded as the father of faith, um, and God, in his relationship with God. Um, Abraham, who was commanded by God to sacrifice his son, which in that time um, would be against the complete moral code of ethics um, that was already prescribed by Moses, right? So he had to go against the grain once again. He had to go against the social construct that was already set before him and find his own truth, to find his own relationship as God as the absolute truth, right? But in contrast to that, uh, as Kierkegaard, under the pseudonym Johannes, suggests how incomprehensible this faith seems to be from a person looking outside in, right? Um, Especially from my experience, we tend to think that we begin with faith. We believe that like somebody already has this certain faith that goes against the grain, right? It's kind of like a Rosa Parks or a Martin Luther King, or that they have this profound sense of self, you know, and it's admirable to see. But we think that they were born with that gift, right? And to a modicum, I believe that's true, but to the majority, I would think a lot of people had to have this time of self reflection, this time where they had to reflect and know that my path in life is my own, and that it's a gift from God, and that's the most how can I say it, the most profound thing or the most interesting thing that I find is because it's like, how did this socialization in effect not completely deter or stop them from getting to that ultimate goal, right? Um, uh, Kierkegaard, rather than possessing and understanding the process and procedure, you have to really appreciate it to be able to, inject yourself into that reality. Um, because and it's like a balancing feature. It's like and if you don't balance it, then you're going to be on the certain extremes, right? And I believe like within these certain extremes that within that, and if we don't have that balance, we start to teeter-totter, and we have to, there's no gray. And especially if you have a God-given path, for instance, then you're going to have to go one or left or right. You're going to have to ignore or, completely immerse yourself in what God is having for you. And very similar to Hegelian assertions that focus on the development of the individual through the process of enslavement, which, I mean, from the outside looking in, again, objectively, people from the outside might see that as an enslavement, right? That this person is completely resigned because they are confined by the reality or the circumstances that they're in. But to the person, subjectively, they understand that they have to go through this period of healing, or this period of self-realization, or this period of acknowledgement of the circumstances at hand. And how could they use the tools that they have currently to construct or to create a foundation that they can build upon, which is faith. I read a book. It's called The Return of Adam. It's by Richard Rohr, and he talks about an initiation, and he elaborates on this way of thinking as well, that the human mind or psyche goes through a period of initiation of spiritual maturity, or within context, it is the groundwork or foundation to an individual's subjective truth, or objectively again, like say the Native Americans, I don't know if this might sound kind of cliche, that at a certain age they have to go like out into the wild, for a week or so or something like that, and have limited tools, and they have to come back and then they're a man, right? It's like they have to resign themselves so that when they come back, they are embraced by fullness. The book of The Return of Adam touches on 5 points to life. And number 1, life is hard. 2, you are not that important, that you are not the only thing on this. You are not the sun. Not everything revolves around you. Your life is not about you, that you have to find something deeper than just what your own carnal desires want. You are not in control, complete control, and you are eventually going to die. And if you think about it, that's very relatable or similar to what you find in the Bible, which is my other source, by the way, obviously, as you could tell. Through the points may sound or have a fragrance of nihilism. If you consist with the Bible, or if you look within the Bible, it might have like some nihilistic terminology, like, for instance, in Ecclesiastes 1, everything is meaningless, or toil is meaningless, that everything has its end and it has its beginning, right? Which is crazy, because if you think of the Bible and like the afterlife and heaven and things like that, it's kind of counterintuitive, you know. But it's to say that, like, it's your life is not your own. It's fleeting. It's just a wind, you know. It's a gas only to be exhaled. Um, and that the only active duty that we can consider or muster is is the absolute active duty towards God. This is where subjective truth or reality is placed, right? Abraham didn't tell anyone what God led him to do. Hypothetically, if he had mentioned this sacrament bestowed upon him by God, then everyone would tell him not to do it. That's where the objectivity would come in, right? Tell him not to do it, and he would not find, and he would only find opposition. There would be nothing, because people try to translate or try to understand another person's reality by their own reality, and by the constructs or the objective constructs that are already set. Um, and or if you look at another person in the Bible, Noah, who was told that he was crazy because it had never rained before the ark, and God told him that you need to build a boat, and you need to, you know, gather all the animals, you know the story, and that but everybody around him had told him that he was crazy, right? But it was his relationship with God that gave him his own objective truth, or subjective truth, I should say. And that was his absolute truth. Like, from him to get to point A to point B, to be a man of resignation, that he had to completely distance himself from the world. The only people that were on the boat was his family. And then to get to this point of faith, he had to resign himself, build a boat, and then all of a sudden, the flood. But nonetheless, like, there's so many correlations within the Bible that, like, Kierkegaard definitely touches on. And I think that he employs it that way because it's so relatable within his time. And it's relatable to me even now. These men had subjective truths that would be challenged by objective reality. They both confide in isolation to find faith, subjective truth again, that would be necessary to be compared to an absolute truth. In conclusion, in relationship to our theses, I believe that the individuals we can appreciate are inevitably or inevitably experience the stages of self-realization. That the despair that we feel is necessary to our growth. That is, as in growing pains, for instance. We all get to that point where we realize it hurts to move, but it hurts to move. It hurts to get further in line, because not everybody's going to see your vision, right? But it hurts even more to stay here. A subjective truth that is realized by everyone seeking development and growth. But yeah, that concludes it. My conclusion is definitely that objective and subjective truth normally are going to clash. And I believe that to find our own subjective truth that that kind of trumps everything, we have to go through these periods of isolation and incubation. And from that, you can exert energy within yourself that allows your own reasoning to come to the surface, rather than being bombarded by somebody else's subjective or the world's objective truth. Thank you.